So I'm very happy to share this research with all of you today and to share it in context, as you will see, for several reasons. It's not really a traditional research because it's based on a book in French. And I tried to summarize what I see as a key idea of this book with this idea of management as incompleting event. And it will be an opportunity to discuss a topic which is at the heart of our workshop today, this issue of Americanity versus Europeanity, and maybe to settle some confusion between these two categories, to blur them a little bit. It's quite strange to start with this picture, again, in context, because as some of you know, as Matt knows, I was on a sabbatical in 2019 and 2020, and I experienced the pandemic in New York, awful time of this period. And the picture you see is a lived experience. It's the last months we spent in New York before coming back to France with my family. And it's a real picture of, as you can see, a fully deserted Manhattan. As you remember, these days, and it's still the case today, but these days, a lot of people were dying. Many people had left New York. We were in a completely desert brownstone house at that time in Brooklyn. And I'm walking. Walking is a way to manage stress and also a way to push further a curiosity for what I saw as an historical event, experiencing history, historical moment. So I'm walking in Manhattan, and I see what you see. I have this strange vision. We are living in a way the end of the world. Everything is exploding. People are dying. Many people have left, and something kept being told on these big walls. A story is shared, something is revealed, something is unveiled. The rare people I see around me have their smartphone in their fingers, and they keep making slide their fingers on the screen of their smartphone. They keep revealing, unveiling what is in germ of the present, and it's quite strange because at this point of time I have the experience and the confirmation of what I'm sharing in my book, something I decided to call managerial apocalypses. I have them in front of my eyes, and I can experience them in my body. And so this vignette is a good way to introduce this book and to share a little bit more about the genesis of the project. Here I share a couple of notes about what I was preparing for this book. So the idea was to write an history of management, to propose at the same time a philosophy of the history of management. I wanted to experiment, sorry, it's an allergy. I wanted to experiment several narrative processes. I wanted to transform a book into an experience. And to come a little bit closer to the project itself, my intuition was that what we are experiencing with this managerial apocalypse, it's a big encounter between management and digitality. And the intuition I wanted to explore with this book is that this encounter mainly happened in the present of World War II, which is also our present today, not only symbolically, not only as part of an imagination that sadly we found in the kind of responses developed during the COVID crisis, or today in the context of the war in Ukraine. This imagination and symbolic space keeps coming back. No, it's much more than this, the intuition I wanted to explore. It's materially, discursively, in many ways, still part of the present we live today, this industrial mobilization. And it's also a great emotion to talk about it today in New York at NYU. The main intuition I had was that exploring the work of a former professor of philosophy of NYU, someone called James Burnham, was a way to come closer to what I wanted to understand and demonstrate with this book and some archives behind this book. So James Burnham published a famous book in 1941. This book was called Managerial Revolution. The subtitle is extremely important. The subtitle is "What is happening in the world?" Is describing something happening in the present. It's not describing a future. He is doing a very prophetical gesture. As most prophets, what they tell about the future is always in germ and visible and already partly materialized in the present. That's what makes the prophecy so strong. So it's not saying, I am so intelligent that there is no sign of what I'm going to say, but here is what will happen. He says, I'm a scientific, and the future I will describe is already in germ in the present. So according to Burnham, capitalism and socialism won't be the big winners of the kind of dialectic he wanted to describe and reconceptualize. A directorial society made of manager was becoming dominant, so beyond capitalist and workers, proletariat, and so on. There was a third social class that was more and more leading the world. And I insist on that. He publishes this book before Pearl Harbor. The United States were not officially at war. The industrial mobilization had already started. And he was convinced that the German would win the war. The Nazi would win the war. So there is a big uncertainty and a very specific atmosphere. And what I found also interesting is that there is a continuous ambiguity in the process of the writing of his book. It's hard to understand if what he says is historical at some moment, the kind of concept he is offering are historical, or if he's not more ontological or metaphysical, trying to understand some political processes that have always been at stake in the world. So what Burnham describes in his book is a process or agencement. It's neither a system or a structure. That it's not really the terminology he's using, system or structure. And he's trying to understand something in many ways in this book, or the Machiavellian, or other books he published later, far beyond capital. And the ongoing dialectic for him will never result in a synthesis or resolution, a big night. It will last and decenter itself in and by managerial activities. And what I found interesting is that he never really says in his book what will be the modalities of this duration. This managerial process that he describes, that is the new center of the world, is not really described in the book. And in a way, following many other people, that's something I wanted to do with this book based on archives and this intuition about World War II and industrial mobilization. I wanted to understand the new managerial process sketched by Burnham as both finitude, infinity, and incompleteness, continuously unveiled by new provisional completeness. There are necessary futures, always in germ in the present. In this direction, a new management keeps incompleting the world, full of problems solved, or in need of being solved, full of provisional and ephemeral solutions, calling for other solutions. I found very interesting, I won't have time to dig into everything in the book, but to discover that he elaborated part of his argument at the same time that planned obsolescence was conceptualized in New York. So that's also one piece I tried to put together with this idea of managerial apocalypse. That's also materially part of the world. The world is planned to be incomplete and to be replaced by something provisionally incomplete. And I will try to give more conceptual details. I won't have time to do more than that, I guess, but about what I mean by that. In the book, and for me, it's not a metaphor, I come back to the famous tale, 1,000th Nights, because I think there is an interesting parallel to draw with this story of Sherazade, always telling an incomplete story, opening the way to the next one, also with some falls and holes, opening the way to the next one, and so on. But with a key difference for what I try to conceptualize with my archives in the book, it is that it's not a story told by someone, it's told by a big assemblage of many things, and the process of unveilment is as much post-human as it is human. So the material imaginary and discursive incompleteness and finitude of managerial narrations make more and more than veiling boredom and waiting by disclosing necessary futures. It keeps incompleting more and more the world. Through this encounter between management and digitality, the world is full of problems solved or in need of being solved. The world is a narrative and non-narrative process, always in the process of becoming consumed by something else, becoming ephemeral. Think about planned obsolescence. So managerial apocalypses are events continuously incompleting the world, from the writing of code to the rise of program obsolescence. The modernity of managerial apocalypses, because of course it's a very modern process, I would say that in a way managers are the equipped version of modernity. It's modernity with resources. Settles a present in crisis. So in the book, I try to wrap the analysis with the philosophers and philosophical concepts of the very present I try to understand. So I use mainly philosophers from the 20th centuries and connected to my story. And you probably recognize with this idea of present in crisis, Ricoeur, this idea of uninhabited world with some aspect of Heidegger that I used. Part of Heidegger's thought about habitation is grounded into what Germany was before and right after World War II, with many cities bombarded and needed to be reconstructed. More largely, there is what I call a loss of depth that I try to also understand with Merleau-Ponty and Deleuze. So there are many 5 philosophers in this story. We are more and more stuck in between utopian future produced by expertise and managerial assemblage on the one hand, and museified past, flatter and flatter on the other hand. Our common experience has no thickness anymore because of this encounter between digitality and management, and the narrative process I named managerial apocalypses. Our presence is not alive anymore. Differences are not productive anymore. So the question of incompletion is also that of what I call in the book the American event, and that I try to understand this idea of American event, the founding of events of the United States continuously re-expressed through the travel in the United States of 3 people. So that's why I was very interested in the keynote of Romain. So I came back, of course, to the trip in the United States of Tocqueville, but also to the trip in the United States of Max Weber, who was in the United States in 1904. And he did a fascinating trip, extremely documented, with a lot of letters he wrote about his trip. And it's also a way to understand a step in the process. And the third traveler I used to understand and describe this American event was Antoine de Saint-Exupéry in New York, in the United States during World War II. So, and through that, I tried to understand what I first saw as an Americanity of a management expressing and re-expressing founding acts of the United States, of the country of eternal novelty and unbounded possibilities. And this connected this philosophy, this result in a connection with the managerial apocalypse I mentioned before, redescribed as an interesting chasm between temporal infinitude of the deployment of managerial apocalypses, indissociable of spatial infinity of horizon, landscape, soul, and American speciality and movement at large. What I try to explain through the eyes and experience both of Tocqueville, Max Weber, and Saint-Exupéry, it's a very particular American speciality, what Bruno Latour calls, in some very recent text, an American planet. And I prefer the term American event for some reasons detailed in the book. So it results in American planet, a planet infinitively available, a resource. In the first decades after World War II, it was apparently possible to eventalize this hiatus, but it is becoming more and more problematic. And sorry, so I won't have time to detail this idea of ethic of Odyssey. I just want, with the time I have at the end, to explain how I arrived to this thesis and the way I describe it, how it is grounded into a free set of data and experience that are at the heart of this book. First, to arrive to this conclusion, I use what I call, as a first narrative process, the intimate story, la petite histoire in French. And it's the history of a non-encounter, a non-event between Saint-Exupéry, Burnham, and Wiener in New York, in Manhattan, during World War II. And it's very funny because I documented a lot what I'm saying. They lived or have lived almost in the same areas, have had a lot of connection, but they have never met. So I wanted to, as they were part of the present I was exploring, each of them, you guess, is a spokesperson of either digitality or management or a counter-thesis of this encounter, something sensible in between. I wanted to see what would produce what Ricoeur calls non-events, or this idea also present in Whitehead's writing in his book, Modes of Thought, that in event and experience, there is also non-event and non-experience, and that they are part of what we are enriched in, not only with our failure, but also by what does not happen. It is also propositional, and there are a lot of common things. It is so. In the book, to come to this conclusion, I used this historical ethnography of a non-event. So there is a fictional part in the book, but extremely documented. Then there is an analysis of industrial and institutional archives. I mainly analyze several archives of the Brooklyn Navy Yards. And it's amazing the number of things I saw in this archive, in particular in the journal of the Brooklyn Navy Yard. And I analyzed extensively 5 years of the Brooklyn Navy Yards to come to this thesis that I describe in the book. I also found a beautiful archive at the Bob's Library. I had several possibilities, but not a lot of time. So I hesitated a lot, but at some point I had a déclic. And I analyzed a journal of retail commerce with all the issues for the period of the industrial mobilization and even before and a little bit after. And it was also very interesting material to explore further the acceleration and the loss of depth of this period. And it was very funny to go in this direction. I also explored the institutional archives of 3 institutional networks of management, the Academy of Management, whose status has been voted just a couple of days after Pearl Harbor. And I saw amazing connections with the industrial mobilization and the World War II. I didn't know our discipline, management and org studies, was connected to the war and the industrial mobilization. And there were very interesting silences in the archives. I can come back to that in our questions because they were fascinating. The American Management Association, also a very good tracer for the story I wanted to explore, and the Society for the Advancement of Management, which is the result of a merger of the Taylor Society. It's from a fictional point of view, it was a beautiful coincidence. I discovered that the apartment of Saint-Exupéry, so who wrote this section about the businessman, was next to the building where management was institutionally invented in New York. At the New York Athletic Club. It's the first encounter between Taylor and a couple of people. And I discovered that it was an atomic bomb and almost next to the apartment of Saint-Exupéry. So there were a lot of funny coincidences also from a fictional point of view. And the third narrative process I included in the book, but for me, it's part of the story. It's wrapped into the movement of this present of World War II and the industrial mobilization. It's what I called in English the philosophical process, a philosophical conversation from the inside, my workshop of concept, in particular with Merleau-Ponty, Deleuze, Ricoeur, Dewey, Heidegger, and Simondon, and in particular their thought that was connected, wrapped, and in conversation with this period of time and what happened right after that. I won't have to go further because of lack of time here. I just show very quickly to give you some idea, and I love this picture because it clearly shows what happened in the US during this period. You have to imagine a country, and I will stop here. That was the 19th nation in the world for its army before World War II, right after the Netherlands. You have to imagine a country in 1937, at the end of 1937, whose unemployment rate was 90%, whose, as you know, was experiencing still a big institutional, social, political crisis. And right after that, after World War II, it's the first economic power in the world. Half of the richness produces the world is American. The unemployment rate is 1%, and a big geopolitics of management at the center of which we can find the United States is established through that. And what I explain in the book is that in the black box in the middle, what happens? It's strongly, extremely managerial, even politically managerial. And it needs to be analyzed temporally, I think, as the inception of these managerial apocalypses that are much more than speculation, what I describe in this process of unveilment, revelation. It's more than speculation. And capitalism, as we usually conceptualize it, of course, we can see speculation as a kind of revelation and a process of unveilment maybe from this perspective. So I won't have time to say more. I want just to conclude with 2 golden nuggets I found in the archives, and just to make this period alive and to show what was at stake in this process of acceleration. And so many of these people fighting desperately against this process of the acceleration. I want quickly to mention one thing I found in the archive that was heartbreaking sometimes. It's the situation of women and their fight at the Brooklyn Navy Yard during this period. I was amazed to discover that it lasted almost 1 year. So women were massively present at the Brooklyn Navy Yard. So 70,000 people work at the Brooklyn Navy Yard, and 7,000 of them were women. And I discovered that they were quickly part of this story. But at the beginning, they had no place for themselves, no restrooms, only restrooms for men, no places at all for comfort. I think that myself, I would have survived just 1 day in the situation I saw for them. And here you have an extract of something well known. It's an archive, an oral archive you can find on the web of the testimony about what one of them lived around this story of the restroom, the toilets, the yard, the relationship with men, this acceleration, just walk, be there, forget your body, and so on. And I invite all of you to listen to their testimony to save the world, our democracy, our values, and so on. And that's one piece I found. And their fight, it's also a fight for depth and a fight against acceleration, to make it short. And I invite you also to conclude to look at a beautiful archives from July 1945. So not far from the end of the war, from a yeoman called Kubrick. You can easily find this article. And it's something beautiful that the managers of the yard do to try to resettle some sickness in the temporality of the yard, because they call in this article a yeoman managing munitions and in the context of the war. But this yeoman is a former worker of the Brooklyn Navy Yard. And so is in the future of the worker of the Brooklyn Navy Yard, but he's also part of their present because he was like them. And I invite you, I can send you the link because this archive is public, to look at this archive, because all what is done by this yeoman in this article, it's to resettle some sickness in this accelerated presence, unveiling and promising a close victory. And don't worry, keep accelerating. It's you don't know where you come. The future is uncertain, but we promise this, and so on, and so on, and so on. And you see this, that at this point of time, there is a huge loss of meaning at work. And I saw in the archive that it was better that the war does not last 5 or 5 months more, because people were exhausted and there was a collapse of meaning there. And you see in this article with the yeoman Kubrick that a kind of temporal work is done to resettle sickness. So I will stop here. I won't have time to detail the other part and some surprises that I introduced in this masculine world that I wanted to fissurate, to make explode at some point of the book, also in a fictional way. And yes, I will stop. I will stop at this point. And yes, and I hope that the middle of next year, the book and all the research which is behind what I'm saying today will be translated into English. Sorry, both for my bad English today, my franglais, and for speaking about a book in French. I hope to be able to share all this very soon in English. Thank you. Yes, sorry. So I don't know if there are questions or reactions.
Oh yeah. Sure. Who's leading? Who's giving the word?
I'll give it to you, Pierre.
Oh really? Okay, thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
I think this is a again, I have the feeling that, and I'm coming back to you again, Hunter. I mean, I'm sort of over-interpreting your work here, but I have the feeling that the vision, the story told by the high modernity social science about the management and so on, is an extremely poor, narrow, and probably in the future doomed theory. It seems like what you were saying, Hunter, and now I'm really freewheeling completely. What you were saying, that today the hope is to make it survive through some kind of sublimity, some kind of aestheticization, a la Hollywood, the kind of stuff that will make it survive. But when you go around in New York almost by yourself, nobody in the street, and you just walk into the archives and you spend a couple of months and look at this with your I don't know, sort of love of detail, love of singularity, in a sense, you discover completely different kind of story. So I'm thinking of Pierre Legendre, who wrote this, who made this movie Dominium Mundi, about the managerial situation. It was a film made by Legendre, the psychoanalyst, and nobody can see it because it's really, really, really black movie. And it's not even a good movie, but it's a movie. It's a way to. But if you make this a script, François Xavier, and have a kind of documentary, intuitive kind of movie around what you've been telling, it could be a fantastic takeoff for a new way of looking upon the management that is completely different from what the American Management Association, the AIMA group thing, and that kind of stuff. Much more interesting and much more rich, and much more fruitful to. Thank you very much. Okay. jet lag and
Yes, thank you, Pierre. And I would love to do something like a documentary or something more based or grounded into art or fiction from that. And through that, what I would love to show is that, and it's been a big surprise for me, before World War II, management, scientific management, was more than illegitimate. It was even illegal in many parts of the US. I mean, it was forbidden in the US Navy yards. It was not just illegitimate. And there was a huge, I saw it in several documents. So in some compartment of the US society, it was simply illegal. And in all over the compartment of the US society, it was illegitimate. So you all know Chaplin's movie done in 1936. But it was part of a more general atmosphere. It's scientific management in question. And then comes World War II, and it's much more than a legitimation. It's a deep reconfiguration. Management becomes much more than scientific management. It becomes something focused on 3 dimensions: flow, digitality, and project, which opens the way to innovation. And that's something completely reconfigured by World War II. And you have to imagine something that I was not aware of, is that suddenly you have the huge American economy that you can guess, that suspends all the legal context that have made illegal any collaborations between competitors. All people from the car manufacturing industries collaborate intensively together. Everything is suspended. So you have the biggest playground you can imagine to legitimate, experiment something. And everything is legally possible. They can talk, they can do, because, of course, you have to win the war. So there is the best reason, the most legitimate reason to collaborate horizontally as far as you want.
May I add something? Yeah, I mean, the war economy made possible collaborations. This happened in many economies, but usually the collaboration and the price-controlled war economy, because there was price control in most countries, sort of stopped and meant the debacle of that industry that was price controlled when the markets opened. So that there's something else happening here too. It's not only a kind of big oligopoly or planned economy or something like that. But when you, I mean, it's mind blowing because I Googled, of course, Burnham, and you see he's a Trotskyist. He's been almost a Nazi. He's going over to, you know, what's going on? What a salad? What? Yeah, what a melting pot! It's poetic. It's not. Don't make a narrative out of it, because then you'll be back in some kind of dull. It's the truth is wilder than the fiction. You know?
Yes, and just to react on that, I had the opportunity to look at a fund of NYU called the Marx-Schartmann Fund, and in this fund you have all the letters written by James Burnham during this complex period when he left the American Workers' Party. So I wanted to understand why he left, why someone who was a Trotskyist Leninist suddenly becomes a conservative quite quickly. And it was really fascinating. That's what I explained in the first chapter, because I think it's part of American history. To understand that, it's to understand much more than the intellectual trajectory of J.S. Burnham. And again, the issue of dialectic, one of the main claims he has, fatal tension he has with Trotsky in the two letters that I found, is precisely about dialectic. And
Walt Disney is not able to tell this story.
In the letters, he criticizes in the book, but that's what I found fascinating. There is not really a counter-proposition. And when he moved to the Machiavellian, he discussed more democratic issues. In a way, he's not really moving to something else, but he's going in another direction. But I was fascinated when I found the letters in the from Marx-Schartmann to understand how important it was for him to try to understand differently this process of dialectic. And he was blocked, intellectually blocked with the Marxist terminology and some views. And on the other hand, maybe he was not interested to go in other philosophical or political directions. I don't find any other options in the letters. And so that's why defining this process, and I propose to define it as managerial apocalypses, and not necessarily following James Burnham himself, sticking to the terminology of capitalism. He's saying that it's not a question of capitalism, this process, and neither a question of socialism. He says it's a third option, something completely different. He says in the book, in 1941 book, that it's not anymore a question of capitalism, that we have to rethink our categories. So
this is contribution to critical management theory, for
in a way, which is quite funny for a very conservative sort, or what is seen now as a very conservative thinker. But I found something very rock and roll and interesting, very critical in this book, the 1941 book. So thank you for your patience. I see maybe a last comment or question from Romain.
I noted some applause from various corners. Pierre, you might want to mute your microphone to diminish the
funny
echo.
noises.
Yes. Wendland, your actual hand has been going up again and again. Now your virtual hand. No, comment or question from you.
No, just a comment on this fascinating, project, because it's not just a historical project, because you're opening up a post-capitalistic vision, and I think this is really incredible. And the interesting point is, or intriguing for me, is your position in this. In between, you have not been inside. You have been on the margin and moving in between what you call American and Europeanness. And I think this movement between the American and the European perspective, this moving inside out and outside in and in between, made it possible that you could do this project. And this is beyond an historical study, also something which perhaps we need more to understand by digging deep, to uplift perspectives which we need to see in our Anthropocene even more, because we are living on the edge of a new Anthropocene, apocalyptic, perspective. And so, projects like this helps to get out of, this apocalyptic modus which we are in. So many things, and just a comment, and in terms of praise of how valuable this project is, in my view. Thanks.
Thank you for your encouragements and the good vibes, Wendelin. Thank you.
And it looks, Roman, your camera is on and your hand is up. Your comment.
Yes, I just wanted to, you know that the Burnham's book has been translated into French, and it's interesting to know who translated it, by whom, and under which title. So
Raymond Aron, l'ère des organisateurs. Yes.
Exactly. And not only that, so it's Raymond Aron translated the book in 47, I think, in his collection, because it was a Cold War, and it was the use of this argument was, but of course management disappeared, revolution disappeared, and it was l'ère des organisateurs. And given the scandalous type of guy that Burnham was, because he was partially scandalous, of course, he asked Léon Blum to do the foreword to the book. And Léon Blum said, if it was not a friend who has asked me, I thought it would be a joke. But there's another thing which is interesting about Burnham reception to Europe, that in I think it's roughly 47, the first week of the French Society for Sociology, organized by Gurvitch, who was probably, by the way, Trotskyist, but I'm not sure. But with everybody there, you had Friedman, you had Bettelheim, you had Hippolyte, you had Naville, you had an incredible, a whole week, and Febvre, Lucien Febvre, the guy from the Annales, was making the introduction, and so on. And it was all on technology and industrialization, not management. And it was, of course, full of ambivalence, but extremely interesting. So just to say that the reception of Burnham, and of course, the other aspect of the reception of Burnham is Orwell, because Orwell explicitly says that his work is a direct consequence of Burnham, because Burnham says explicitly that thanks to technology, the dictature, the power, the all overpower, the overpowerful of government is much more dangerous because of the power of technology. I mean, it's an extremely, so you have James Burnham is a very important book all over the place. Thank you.
Thank you, Romain, for that comment, and Francois Xavier for your excellent presentation. I've got lots of thoughts that we may have time to share. What we've done, people, is just talk all the way through the break. And so I'm not sure whether a break is even possible, if appropriate at all now. I look to my organizing colleagues to ask, is this the Zoom room where the next thing happens? It's not. So we have to bounce out of this.
Again, it's another link in the program.
Hit the link in the program. People, thank you for this extended and wonderful session. We'll see you.
Can we put that link in the chat?
The next link in the chat for this. Let's see.
Yes, it's possible.
Or a mail.
I think that is the link to the next session. Hunter, thank you for that request. So we will cut and paste that into our browser window and see each other on the other side.
Is it starting straight away, Matt?
I think so, yeah.
Start.
Yeah.